Clarkson was at school, he was told by his career teachers that he couldn't organise a piss-up in a brewery. Well, look at him now. Not only has he done that, but he's launched his very own beer, and I'm here.
In 2020, Jeremy Clarkson harvested his first proper barley crop at Diddley Squat Farm and ran headfirst into a reality most small British farmers know all too well. There was nobody to sell it to. The big mousters had zero interest in a modest, unproven yield from a TV personality's countryside experiment. The grain merchants who did show up offered prices that barely justified the fuel burned bringing the harvest in. By his own account, it was exactly the kind of quiet financial dead end that puts family farms out of business every year across this country. 6 years on, that same rejected barley sits at the foundation of a drinks business that's been officially recognized as the fastest-growing beer brand in Britain. And the numbers behind it are starting to make some very large, very old brewing companies sit up and pay attention. I've received another email from the legal department regarding my latest advertisement for Hawkstone Lager, brewed using barley from Diddley Squat Farm, and apparently, I'm not permitted to say it's better than Budweiser. But it is better than Budweiser. It just is. Why can't I say that? Why can't I? Welcome back to Clarkson Empire. This is not a story about a celebrity attaching his name to a can of lager and watching the licensing money arrive. Plenty of famous people have gone down that road, and most of those products disappear within a year or two once the novelty fades. What happened with Hawkstone is a different kind of story and a more instructive one, because it's fundamentally about supply chains, the politics of British pub trade, and a national drinks market that has been controlled by the same handful of giants for generations. Here's how it actually unfolded. It begins with a problem, not a breakthrough. When that first barley harvest had nowhere to go, Jeremy wasn't sitting on a grand commercial strategy. He had a barn full of grain and a local landlord who happened to know two people worth calling. Rick and Emma Keane ran a small outfit called Cotswold Brewing Company out of Bourton-on-the-Water, a business they'd built from scratch in 2005, focused on lager rather than the ales most British microbreweries default to. Rick had trained as a brewer through proper channels, including time inside larger commercial operations, before going hands-on at microscale. The moment Jeremy tasted the first batch brewed from his own crop, something connected. He put money in. The joint venture launched in 2021 under the name Hawkstone, drawn from a Neolithic standing stone located near the farm. Jeremy described it at the time with a simplicity that quietly underplays how calculated the move actually was. I'm a farmer now, so I grow barley, and I like lager, so it seemed obvious to make some. That sentence carries more weight than it lets on, because what he was actually describing wasn't a brand concept, it was a supply chain. And supply chains, as unglamorous as they sound, are precisely where Hawkstone has constructed its most durable advantage. Here's why that matters, beyond just being a decent pint with a recognizable face on the label. Britain's beer industry runs on scale. The major brewers control vast production sites, established national logistics operations, and marketing budgets that dwarf anything a small brewery could ever deploy in a direct fight. Their entire competitive edge is built on consistency and volume. They can brew enormous quantities of a uniform product at a cost per unit that a business the size of Hawkstone cannot touch, and they're well aware of it. Challenging them on price and output would be a losing proposition before the first barrel was filled. So Hawkstone didn't try. Rather than competing on scale, it built its entire identity around the one thing the major brewers are structurally incapable of offering: a genuine, visible, named link between a specific piece of farmland and the glass in front of you. The barley in Hawkstone Lager is described as coming from JC barley, grain grown and harvested at Diddley Squat Farm in Chipping Norton, alongside grain from other British farms. It's not sourced from continental Europe, even in years when doing so would have been considerably cheaper. When Jeremy talks about the hops, the same specificity applies. All our ingredients are British, including our hops, he said. We're working with British hop farmers to help facilitate more choice and more growth in the UK, so we're not dependent on New World and American hops. That's not marketing copy. It's a procurement decision that costs more and sacrifices flexibility, made deliberately because the credibility of the entire brand depends on it being genuine. The production process supports that positioning rather than quietly undermining it. Many commercial lagers reach market in around 9 days. Hawkstone undergoes an extended lagering phase of 4 to 6 weeks, a slower cold conditioning process that builds clarity and depth of flavor, but consumes time and tank capacity that faster rivals never have to spend. The brand's own description of its approach, hard to make, easy to drink, is refreshingly honest about the trade-off involved. They're choosing a longer process because the alternative would mean playing by the big brewers' rules. And on those terms, a company this size doesn't win. Then comes the second obstacle that stops most small British drinks brands in their tracks, and it has nothing to do with what's actually in the glass. It's getting the product into pubs. Britain's pub trade has been shaped for decades by the tied house system, where a significant proportion of venues are contractually bound to buy their beer from a small number of approved national suppliers. And here's something worth understanding about just how entrenched that system actually is. At its peak, the tied house arrangement meant that the 6 largest brewers in Britain controlled somewhere in the region of 3/4 of all pub beer sales. Think about that for a second. 3/4. Not through making a better product necessarily, but through owning the pipes the beer flowed through. The 1989 beer orders tried to break that grip, force the biggest brewers to sell off pubs, loosen some of the contractual chains. And yet here we are, decades later, and the same basic dynamic still shapes who gets to pour what and where. The system bent. It didn't break, which is exactly why the independent pub route wasn't just Hawkstone's preferred strategy. For a brand this size, it was essentially the only viable one. Hawkstone didn't attempt to dismantle that system from above. It worked around it from below, targeting independent, free-of-tie pubs directly, and offering supply terms and margins that landlords weren't accustomed to seeing from major national contracts. Critically, the brand arrived carrying something that money can rarely manufacture from a standing start: built-in audience recognition from a television program already being watched by millions of people around the world. Landlords who listed Hawkstone discovered something unusual. Customers weren't simply accepting whatever was on the menu. They were walking in and asking for it by name. Chalkboards advertising Hawkstone on tap became a familiar sight outside pubs that had never stocked a single keg from a celebrity-backed brand before. Within roughly a year of launch, more than 500 independent venues across the country were pouring it. That number kept climbing. By the most recent available figures, Hawkstone is now stocked in more than 2,000 pubs and retail locations across the UK, with some estimates putting total pub presence closer to 4,000 venues when every channel is counted. It's also reached major supermarket shelves, including Waitrose and Sainsbury's, placing it alongside brands that have been trading for over a century. Now for the financial picture, because this is where the story shifts from interesting to genuinely striking. It's worth being precise here, rather than rounding figures up for dramatic effect. In the financial year to March 2024, Hawkstone recorded sales of £7.8 million. That alone would represent a strong outcome for a 3-year-old drinks business. What followed is the part that drew attention from the wider business press. According to Companies House filings and reporting from City AM, the company's total equity leapt from £432,000 to just over £3 million in the year to March 2025. Current assets nearly tripled, reaching close to £5 million. Stock holdings grew from roughly £600,000 to almost £2 million. Cash reserves rose from around £200,000 to £1.2 million, and the headcount doubled, climbing from 28 employees to 53 in a single 12-month period. There's a detail buried in those numbers that doesn't get talked about enough. Going from 28 to 53 employees in 12 months isn't just a headcount statistic. That's a business rebuilding its internal infrastructure in real time while simultaneously trying to keep up with demand it probably didn't fully anticipate. New hires mean new onboarding, new management layers, new processes that haven't been stress tested yet. Most small companies that try to scale that fast end up breaking something operationally before the revenue catches up. The fact that Hawkstone's cash position and stock holdings grew alongside the headcount rather than being drained by it suggests the growth was being managed with more discipline than the casual farmer in wellies image might lead you to expect. Reporting from the Sunday Times around the same period put annual sales at £21.3 million, a figure that, if accurate, represents revenue nearly tripling year on year. Some more recent regional coverage has cited figures closer to £45 million, with average annual growth exceeding 100% across a 3-year run. We want to be straightforward about this rather than cherry-picking whichever figure sounds most impressive. Different reports appear to be drawing from different financial periods and different methods of counting revenue. Hawkstone, as a private company beneath certain filing thresholds, doesn't publish the kind of detailed accounts that would allow every figure to be reconciled precisely. What every credible source agrees on, regardless of which specific number you use, is the direction and the magnitude of the growth. This is not a brand expanding steadily. It's a brand expanding at a rate that would be considered remarkable, even among Britain's fastest-moving consumer companies. That growth has been formally acknowledged. Hawkstone has appeared in the Sunday Times 100 list of Britain's fastest-growing private companies in 3 consecutive years. In one of those years, it ranked 24th fastest-growing company in the entire country, with no other beer brand placed above it, making it by that measure the single fastest-growing beer brand in Britain. More recently, it was named the fastest-growing private company in the southwest of England. On the product side, the lager itself has collected a Gold World Beer Award and was named Country Winner for England, alongside a series of Great Taste Awards and additional World Beer Award medals across its wider portfolio. That wider portfolio now includes a cider produced with Alex James, the Blur bassist who has spent the last 2 decades building a serious farming career in Oxfordshire. The apples come from older heritage varieties that yield less per acre than commercial cultivars, but produce a noticeably more complex flavor profile. That's a second product with a second public figure, built on the identical philosophy of slower production and visible provenance. It means the business isn't a single celebrity vehicle that rises and falls with one person's profile. It looks more like a small portfolio of British drinks brands that happen to share a supply chain and a sense of humor. There's a broader point here that's easy to miss if you're just tracking the headline numbers. The category Hawkstone is operating in, premium British lager with a documented provenance story, barely existed as a meaningful commercial segment a decade ago. Craft beer had its moment. IPAs and sours and hazy pales got all the attention, and lager was largely treated as the boring older brother that nobody was interested in reinventing. What Hawkstone spotted, whether by design or by accident, was that the same consumer who'd happily pay a premium for a small batch sourdough or a named farm cheese hadn't really been given a lager they could feel the same way about. That gap was hiding in plain sight. And the timing, post-pandemic, with people increasingly paying attention to where their food and drink actually comes from, turned out to be almost perfectly aligned with what the brand was already doing anyway. The marketing operation behind all of this has grown considerably more sophisticated than a typical small brewery would normally sustain. According to the agency managing Hawkstone's brand strategy, the team maintains a consistent central narrative: the farming story, the slower process, the British sourcing, and then produces highly localized content for individual pubs at a volume that would be physically impossible to achieve manually. Each venue stocking Hawkstone can receive its own tailored social post, video, and even a custom beer mat. Work that once would have taken hours per location can now be produced for thousands of pubs in approximately the time it used to take to do one. The core message stays constant. The reach multiplies. That combination, an authentically traceable product, backed by marketing, capable of operating at a much larger company's scale, is a substantial part of why a 6-year-old brewery is competing for shelf space with names that were established before either Jeremy or Rick Keane were born. The broader commercial picture around Jeremy now stretches well beyond the brewery. There's the Farmer's Dog, the pub in the nearby village of Asthall that Jeremy bought for around £1 million, which now operates as both a working local and something close to a destination venue for fans of the show, with weekend queues that have become a recognized feature of the place. Hawkstone, however, remains its own separately registered company, with its own management structure, its own production facility, and its own financial results. Entirely distinct from the farm shop, the pub, and the television program that made all 3 of them famous. What makes Hawkstone genuinely hard for a major brewer to replicate isn't any single decision in isolation. It's that every element of the model reinforces every other element. The barley originates from a real, named, televised farm, which gives the sourcing story credibility rather than making it sound invented. The extended brewing process supports the premium price point rather than contradicting it. The marketing trades on self-deprecating humor and demonstrable authenticity rather than pure celebrity presence, which makes it land with pub landlords who'd otherwise be instinctively suspicious of another famous name trying to sell them kegs. And the distribution approach targeted precisely the segment of the market, independent free-of-tie pubs, that decades of tied house dominance had conditioned to be wary of approaches from major suppliers. None of that required Jeremy Clarkson to have a detailed understanding of brewing, and by his own cheerful admission, he doesn't. "I don't know what EBITDA means and I don't want to know," he said, with the same frank self-awareness that's characterized the farming show throughout. "But I like the idea of growing the barley, making the beer, and then drinking it. That part I understand." It's a throwaway comment, but it points at something genuine about why this particular venture has worked where most celebrity drinks brands haven't. He's not presenting himself as the brewer. Rick Keane and the operational team run that side of the business. What Jeremy actually contributes is the one thing no level of investment can manufacture from nothing: a documented, broadcast, entirely real connection to where the ingredients come from, repeated across 5 series of television to an audience of millions who watched the barley growing long before they ever saw the finished pint. Whether Hawkstone can sustain anything close to its recent rate of expansion is a genuinely open question. We'd rather say that honestly than project a straight line upward, because no business growing at this pace does so indefinitely. What's already happened, though, doesn't require any embellishment. A brewery that came into existence because nobody wanted to purchase one farmer's barley is now occupying the same supermarket shelves, the same awards shortlists, and increasingly, the same export conversations as businesses that have been doing this for generations. The major brewers built their position on scale. Hawkstone built its position on the one thing scale cannot counterfeit. Let us know in the comments which part of this story caught you off guard, and tell us what you'd like us to look at next. From the farm, the brewery, or the pub. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you in the next one.